creep in gently. It hit all at once, cold, flat, unwelcoming. The kind of morning that didn't care that the night before had shredded every sense of security we had left. The kind that seemed to look you dead in the eye and ask whether you were going to break or fight. I moved through the house on instinct alone. Guardian glued to my leg, Valor on my other side. My mind still replaying metal crunching under the SUVs and the way the ranch trembled afterward. Every shadow felt like a warning. Every sound sharpened into something that made my stomach tighten. I kept expecting another engine to roar down the road, another impact, another escalation. But what greeted me was worse than noise. It was silence. That heavy, knowing silence that settles after a line has been crossed, and everyone senses the next move is already in motion. The ranch felt suspended, like Cedar Creek was waiting to see what I would do next. Waiting to see if I'd fold, waiting to see if I'd run, waiting to see if fear would do what the crash hadn't. But fear wasn't what rose in me when I reached the kitchen. It was something far more focused. By sunrise, the grief had settled into something sharper. Focused. Ted was already in my kitchen with folders spread across the table. HOA budgets, past dues, maintenance logs, vendor invoices, and a stack of documents the HOA swore didn't exist when asked for them months ago. Frank stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw ticking steadily as each new page confirmed what they'd suspected. Karen wasn't just corrupt. She was calculated, organized, and reckless enough to think no one would ever look behind the curtain. "This isn't harassment anymore," Ted said, tapping a red-flagged invoice. I couldn't even keep up at this point with her stupid-ass shenanigans. I had more pressing matters to concentrate on, and that took precedence over a dingbat drunk on power, control, greed. And now I find out. On revenge. This is financial crime. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering through 2 LLCs she owns but never disclosed. I'm calling the ADA, and when he sees this, he's calling the FBI's financial division. Frank let out a low whistle. She's been bleeding the HOA dry for years and using that money to go after people outside her jurisdiction. Ted nodded. And now she's crossed into federal territory. Poisonings, property destruction, environmental crimes. She's pushed too far. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stared at Sophie's halter hanging on the back of the chair. Polished, clean, empty, waiting for a horse who would never come home again. But this time the grief didn't crush me. It fueled me. "Let's finish this," I said quietly. Ted didn't look surprised. He just nodded once. He didn't move at first. He gathered the files slowly, lining them into a tight, deliberate stack as the room settled around the weight of what we had just said out loud. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, the kind that marks a turning point. When he finally stood, the detectives followed him into the living room, badges visible now not as symbols of authority, but as acknowledgments that this had crossed out of local dispute and into something darker. The air felt different, sharper, like the moment before a storm breaks, not with pity, but with the understanding that the case had just changed categories. "This is attempted animal homicide," the lead detective said to Ted under his breath, but loud enough that it was part of the record. Ted answered without looking up. "Not attempted, intent was lethal." Ted traced the delivery. The stall latch had been lifted from the outside, not broken, not forced, lifted with knowledge. Someone who knew how barns function and had entered, poisoned, and closed the door again so the discovery would be delayed. That evening Ted called. "Lab results from Green Tech and Forensic Water Labs just came in," he said. "The grains got monensin and organophosphate traces, and the well water shows nitrates and petroleum solvents. This wasn't careless. It was coordinated." I stared at the dark window and felt something inside me lock into place. "Then we prove it," I said. That meant this wasn't random malice. It was inside knowledge. Before the detectives even asked, Marla stated it on record. Access requires proximity, foreknowledge, and motive. This is not vandalism. This is targeted retaliation under an active injunction. One of the detectives nodded once and made the call that changed the case status from investigative to prosecutorial. The sheriff's office was no longer taking reports. They were building a war that had now crossed a line it could never return from. Marla did not cry at the devastating news. She did not comfort. She went straight from the barn aisle to the hood of her car, opened her case folder on the metal, and began drafting. "This changes the filing," she said, not looking up. "We're no longer petitioning for injunction. We are filing for criminal charges and civil damages under lethal cruelty and malicious intent to destroy a business." She wasn't reacting. She was weaponizing. Ted didn't speak to anyone. He walked the perimeter again, not to confirm what happened, but to identify how they got in, what they touched, what they left, what they will do next. He had shifted from investigator to hunter. And me? I didn't break in the barn. I broke when I stepped outside. Because Sophie wasn't just an animal. She was the last piece of the life I had before this war began. Poisoning her wasn't tactical. It was intimate. It was the kind of act a person commits when their goal isn't to win, but to make you bleed for resisting. That is when the anger stopped being heat and became focus. I didn't sob, I didn't scream, I didn't shake. I went still. The kind of still that happens when grief fossilizes into resolve. "She will bury me or I will bury her," I said. No metaphor, no sarcasm, no hesitation. Ted heard me. He didn't argue. He just answered once. "Then we finish it." That was the second vow. Not the vow to fight, but the vow to end. By sunset, the detectives were back, not in uniforms this time, but in plain clothes with evidence bags and warrants. Sophie's death moved the case out of investigation and into criminal proceedings. Samples scraped from the poisoned grain. Estall hardware dusted for prints. Boot impressions cast in plaster. And the euthanasia report logged as exhibit evidence. "We are no longer investigating harassment," the lead detective said to Marla in front of me. "We are investigating felony animal cruelty with malicious intent and premeditation." That single reclassification changed everything. The next morning, Marla filed our first major strike, a criminal complaint and a civil suit in parallel, one for prosecution, one for damages. It was the legal equivalent of pulling a pin. And the explosion happened exactly where expected, inside the HOA. Within 24 hours, their forum imploded. Posts reversed tone. I never supported Karen. She acted alone. We didn't know anything about it. We distanced ourselves from her actions. The same people who reposted her lies were now rewriting history to save themselves. Not one defended her. They abandoned her like rats off a sinking ship. And that told me something essential. Her power had never been authority. It had been intimidation. The moment consequences entered the room, her army disappeared. But Karen didn't disappear. Cornered people with a motive don't surrender. They detonate. And she still had one escalation left before court could stop her. Karen didn't send a flyer this time. She didn't hide behind a forum or a board member or a burner account. She came back in person, not to negotiate, not to deny, but to unload whatever was left in her before the courts took the stage away from her. She waited until I stepped out of the barn, then walked up the gravel driveway with the posture of someone who had already lost but refused to accept the terms. "You think you've won or something?" she hissed before I even closed the distance. "You think this ends just because you called the police?" She wasn't shaking. She was vibrating, the way rage looks when it realizes it is finally outmatched. I didn't answer her. Silence is gasoline to people like her. She stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You killed that horse yourself. You staged this entire thing to make us look—" Ted was behind me before she finished the sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Walk away now. You are under active investigation, and anything you say on this property is admissible." Most people obey when a former homicide detective gives them an exit. But Karen? Oh, hell no. Not her. She didn't. Instead, she leaned in with the kind of smile people wear when pain is their only weapon left. "You're not getting out of this," she hissed. I don't care how many cops or lawyers you hide behind. I will burn your life to the ground before I let you win." She meant it, not metaphorically, not emotionally. She said it like a promise, and the detectives would later classify it as one, because threats given under investigation aren't words. They are evidence of intent before execution. Ted recorded her on his phone before I even realized he'd pulled it out. He didn't hide it. He held it where the audio would be clean and the timestamp clear. That little digital file would later become a line item in an evidence list. Threats recorded on property during active investigation. Detectives added her statement to the file within hours. Marla drafted an emergency motion to include the recorded threat as proof of consciousness of guilt, and to push for immediate protective orders and seizure of key HOA accounts. The judge granted an expedited hearing. The courtroom calendar folded in our favor like a blueprint snapping to fit. Within 48 hours, the HOA accounts were frozen pending forensic audit. The county issued subpoenas for bank records. 2 board members who still clung to Karen's narrative found subpoenas at their doors that morning and finally stopped pretending ignorance. Neighborhood gossip turned into legal paperwork overnight. That's the point where intimidation loses the advantage, when the ledger replaces the rumor mill. But paperwork doesn't stop arsonists. It only changes the tempo. And Karen's promise that she would burn your life to the ground stopped being a metaphor and resolved itself into a plan someone intended to finish. We tightened everything we could. Fire lanes cleared, backup generators tested, shuttered hay where we could, additional cameras angled into blind spots. But people who have made a promise like that don't always play fair. They plan for every contingency, including the one where investigators arrive too late. The last thing that happened before the big fire was a quiet evening where everyone pretended the day had not been carved into our calendars. We tried to sleep. We did not. We didn't sleep, not because we were afraid, but because the silence was unnatural. Farms have a sound even at night. Horses shifting weight, tack creaking, owls moving tree to tree. That night had none of it. It was the same stillness that came before the arson attempt, only heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath with us. Ted paced the perimeter with the deliberate rhythm of someone walking a fuse before it burns out. He didn't say, "Something is coming." He didn't have to. His vigilance said it for him. Marla stayed on call, her laptop open at my kitchen table, rewriting filings as new evidence arrived by the hour. She kept her blazer on like she was already in the courtroom where this would end. Lawyers don't wear armor. Paperwork is their steel. And me? I walked the barn like a chapel, down each aisle, pausing at every stall door as if memorizing the horses' faces in case I never saw them alive again. That is the kind of instinct war gives you. You start saying goodbye before you even know why. The detectives increased drive-bys. You could see the cruiser lights sweep the road every 20 minutes. Proof that someone besides us finally understood this wasn't a neighbor dispute, but a countdown. It was the kind of night that doesn't contain danger. It precedes it. And in hindsight, every second of that stillness reads like handwriting before the page catches fire. Because the next escalation wouldn't be a message. It would be an attempt to erase everything at once. It began with movement where none belonged. Ted was finishing a perimeter sweep when he spotted it. A horse trailer parked just outside the western gate, tucked halfway behind a stand of cottonwoods. Lights off, but engine running low. Too quiet. Too deliberate. Too new to belong to any neighbor. Ted's instincts sharpened. "Someone's hunting," he muttered, and went straight for Frank. By the time both men reached the gate, a shadow inside the paddock was already moving. Not a stray. Not a wanderer. Someone who knew where to go. A figure was leading one of our boarders' horses, a $150,000 imported Frisian stallion, toward the waiting trailer. The stallion's ears flicked anxiously, stepping forward only because well-trained horses obey pressure, even when their guts scream otherwise. Frank's breath hissed between his teeth. "That's no amateur, that's a job." Ted didn't shout. He didn't warn. He sprinted. The figure didn't even have time to bolt. Ted hit him low and hard, slamming him into the dirt with a force that rattled the ground. The stallion ripped free, rearing and galloping back toward the barn in a blur of black mane and panic. Frank caught him at the gate, murmuring to soothe him. Ted immediately rolled the thief over and froze. Frank whispered it first. "Oh, hell." The sheriff arrived moments later, lights sweeping the scene. The thief's hood was pulled back, and the truth stared all of us in the face. Warren McQuaid, Karen's nephew, her right-hand enforcer, her shadow, now caught red-handed. The sheriff shook his head in disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me." Warren clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. Ted didn't give him the chance. He reached into Warren's jacket and pulled out a folded note. Damp with sweat, creased from being jammed in a pocket. The sheriff opened it. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable. "Another horse will go tomorrow. Remember, compliance equals peace." Warren's bravado cracked instantly. She told me to leave it," he blurted. "Said Charlie needed a fierce reminder. Said if I didn't do it, she'd deal with me next. Aunt Karen doesn't ask twice." The sheriff exhaled sharply. "So she sent her own nephew to steal a 6-figure horse and leave a threat on the stall door." Ted leaned in close, voice all steel. "You walked into my barn. You touched one of my horses. And you thought you'd walk out alive?" Warren shrank back. The sheriff signaled to his deputies. "Warren McQuaid, you're under arrest for felony horse theft, trespassing, attempted extortion, and criminal conspiracy." He didn't fight, just sagged, defeated as they dragged him toward the cruiser. And when the taillights faded into the dark, the ranch fell quiet again. But not with peace, with warning, with charge, with inevitability. Because if Karen was now using her own family, she was done sending messages. She was preparing for destruction. 3 days passed in a haze, not calm, just numb. The kind of numb that made the days feel slow and heavy. Barn chores happening on autopilot while grief hung over the place like fog. That's when she showed up again. The crunch of tires rolled across the gravel, slow, deliberate, entitled. A silver Escalade. Karen stepped out like she was arriving at a brunch date instead of a ranch under investigation. Her perfume hit the air first. Sickly sweet, overdone, suffocating. "Oh, Charlie," she crooned, clasping her hands in dramatic faux concern. "Wow. I can't believe you're still here after everything. I mean, if it were me, I'd have gotten the hell out of Dodge at the first sign of trouble. But not you. Oh no, you're just a regular Ms. Wonder Woman." "Huh?" Not to mention the devastating news. Losing Sophie on top of poor Alfie. 2 tragedies so close together. She shook her head with exaggerated sympathy. "It must be unbearable." Rhonda stiffened beside me, fists curling tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Karen's tone shifted, softening into something silkier, far more venomous. "It really does make one wonder, you know," she murmured, eyes drifting toward the indoor arena. "If certain ranches just aren't safe anymore. Things seem to keep happening here." She sighed, theatrical and patronizing. "Such a shame." Rhonda stepped forward, fully ready to swing. I caught her arm. "Ron." "No." Karen's smile widened, practically glowing with satisfaction. Then her gaze slid across the arena, following the fencing like she was mentally measuring it. "You might as well accept the inevitable," she said brightly. "Your property will be annexed into Vista Hills HOA, whether you like it or not. The paperwork's already being lined up." She shrugged, tossing her hair. "And hey, if you're all well-behaved, maybe I'll hire you on to manage the place under my control." "Wouldn't that be poetic?" Rhonda ripped her arm out of my grip, a half-second from decking her. I grabbed her again, harder. "Not today, Ron," I said through my teeth. "That's just what she wants, to nail us to the wall." Karen's smile sharpened. "Oh, that temper," she purred. "You really should keep your staff on a tighter leash, Charlie. You wouldn't want any more accidents happening now, would you? Hmm? Ted stepped up behind us, then solid as steel, jaw locked. "Visit's over," he said. Karen didn't even look at him. She slid back into her SUV, rolled down the window, and added with a soft, poisonous lilt, "Don't worry, hun. I'll be seeing you real soon. One way or another." Then she drove off, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air and a cold certainty settling in my gut. Her next move wouldn't be words. It would be fire. By the time the kitchen clock hit 10:42 p.m., the ranch was quiet, but Ted wasn't. He sat at my dining room table surrounded by equipment that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a narcotics surveillance van. Signal receptor, waveform monitor, directional antenna, and a burner laptop humming low. Frank stood beside him with his arms crossed, eyes sharp, scanning the monitor like he was waiting for a heartbeat to appear. "What are you two doing?" I asked. Frank didn't look up. "Your little HOA president has been communicating with someone. Every night, same tower, same pattern, same unencrypted signal. She's sloppy as hell." Ted adjusted the antenna a quarter inch and the monitor beeped a soft, predatory sound. "We're done letting her move in the dark," Ted said. "She's coordinating with somebody. We're figuring out who." I stared at the device. "Can you actually see her messages?" Frank lifted an eyebrow. "If she wanted privacy, she shouldn't broadcast her criminal plans over a public frequency like it's a coupon code." The monitor pinged again, louder this time. A new ID appeared. Frank smirked. "There she is." Ted leaned in, jaw tightening. Karen Livingston. Same outbound signature as the nights the water was poisoned. Same ID as the night Alfie was cut. Same pattern as the trailer attack. My stomach dropped. "So you're telling me every time something happened, she was texting someone?" Ted nodded once. "Every single damn time." Another blip on the monitor. A live connection. Frank's voice dropped. "Phone just unlocked. She's typing." Ted straightened, eyes sharp as broken glass. "Get ready. Whatever she's about to send, it's going to tell us exactly what her next move is." I swallowed hard. Who the hell is she texting? Ted didn't look away from the screen. "Looks like she's texting Mommy Dearest." Another buzz lit up the monitor, an incoming message. Frank tapped the display. "And here we go, folks." Karen sat in her Escalade, engine idling down the road, hands shaking with the kind of angry energy that made her vision pulse. The fake condolence visit hadn't gone the way she planned. I didn't crumble. I didn't beg. I didn't lash out. And that infuriated Karen more than anything else. "She should have slapped me," Karen hissed, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. If Rhonda had taken the bait, even a little, I could have had them charged with assault. One punch, one shove, one stupid slip. Instead, Charlie had stopped Rhonda cold and ruined the whole damn setup. And of course, her two shadow dogs were right there. Ted Redding, in full homicide detective stillness, and Frank Hunter with those narc eyes that saw everything. Karen couldn't get close, couldn't provoke, couldn't maneuver. She slammed her palm against the wheel. Useless. She's always got those two glued to her. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it and opened the thread she never cleared. "Mom!" Her last restraint snapped. She began typing, thumbs hitting too hard. "Karen, that stuck-up bitch didn't fall for anything. She won't budge. Doesn't matter what I do. And her muck monkey almost hit me. Would have been perfect. But no." Charlie grabbed her like she saw it coming. Margaret texted back quickly. "Control yourself. Anger clouds strategy." Karen replied, texting. "Oh, that's easy for you to say. Her two guard dogs are always there. Redding, Hunter, watching me like I'm the criminal. Margaret, you are the one pushing the plan, so push, carefully." Karen, "I can't get near her. They're practically glued to her 24/7. Margaret, then find her when she's alone." Karen, Impossible. They hover around her like she's friggin' royalty. Margaret. Then you wait and watch. Everyone slips eventually. Karen. She should have broken by now. Charlie's nag is dead. The muck monkey's plow horse is also in the knacker's yard. Her staff is terrified. Margaret. Grief is leverage. Use it. Karen. I did. She's still fighting. Damn it. She's just so stubborn. Margaret. Then escalate. Karen. Mom, what do you mean escalate? Margaret. Exactly what we've always done. Pressure, fear, remove her ability to stay. Karen. I already took out her trailer and that rusty old jalopy they call a truck. She freaked, but she didn't fold. Margaret. Then take something bigger and keep taking until she does fold. Karen. Like what, pray tell, Long pause. Margaret. If she refuses to sell or leave willingly, then make it so she can't stay. Burn it all to the ground. Karen. Mom, arson's a bit over the top, don't you think? Margaret. No, my dear. It'll break her for sure, and she'll wind up running like a scared little rabbit. The monitor chirped in sharp bursts, each message hitting like a hammer. Ted didn't blink. Frank barely breathed. Every line tightened the room. When Karen complained about the failed condolence visit, Frank snorted. Oh yeah, that tracks. She wanted a reaction she could use in court. Ted said nothing. He watched the feed, eyes cold. Another ping. Cutting the horse. Ted's jaw clenched. She's admitting to Alfie, he said quietly. Right there. Cutting the horse. Frank tapped that line. That's aggravated animal cruelty. Felony. She's too stupid to realize she's confessing. Another ping. Poison didn't break her either. Ted went still. That's Sophie, he whispered. Frank swore under his breath. That's enough for a warrant. Ted shook his head slightly. It's enough for a task force. The monitor beeped again. Barrels didn't scare her off. Frank exhaled sharply. Sheesh, that's the pond. Ted pointed at the timestamp. She's tying all of it together. The water poisoning, the dog attack, the trailer sabotage. She's bragging. Frank muttered, Perfect. Dig your grave, sweetheart. A new burst of messages hit all at once. Karen complaining about Ted and Frank being police dogs. Karen whining that Charlie didn't break. Karen bragging about trying to provoke Rhonda into hitting her. Frank barked a humorless laugh. She's scared of us. Good. Ted didn't laugh. She's not scared enough. Then Margaret's responses began, and the mood inside the dining room shifted instantly. Margaret's tone was cold, precise. Every line came in like a surgical cut. Escalate another way. If you cannot provoke, apply pressure. Isolation breaks people. Find another pressure point. Ted whispered, almost to himself. That woman is calculating harm like she's writing a grocery list. Frank's voice dropped low and lethal. We're not dealing with an HOA president. We're dealing with a predator. Finally, the line appeared. She'll run like a scared little rabbit. Ted froze. Frank froze with him. Both men leaned closer, as if the words might change if they looked hard enough. That's not a prediction, Ted said. That's a directive. Frank nodded slowly. They're not strategizing anymore. They're planning. Another ping hit immediately. Karen. I don't see that happening. She's still standing. Ted straightened, spine rigid. She won't be for long, he murmured. Not with Margaret steering this. Frank turned to him. We need to prepare. Ted didn't look away from the screen. We already are. The room felt smaller after reading those messages. Tighter, like the walls themselves had moved in an inch. I'd lived through months of sabotage, cruelty, threats, and sleepless nights. But seeing it written out like that, watching the two people behind it speaking so casually about breaking me, it hit differently. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't neighbor issues. It was intent. Cold, calculated, escalating. Ted pushed his chair back, slow and deliberate, the way a man does when he's trying to keep rage from spilling out of him. Frank didn't move. He just stared at the last message on the feed like it was a crime scene photo. "So this is where we are now," I said quietly. Ted turned toward me with an expression I'd seen only twice before. Once after Alfie, and once after Sophie. "You're not dealing with an HOA anymore," he said. "You're dealing with an organized family operation. They've been doing this for years." Frank crossed his arms. "And they're running out of patience." A cold knot formed at the base of my spine. "Okay then. So what happens next?" Ted didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer came from the monitor. A sharp ping that sliced through the house like a knife point. Frank's head snapped toward the screen. "She's texting again." Another ping. Another line of glowing words forming on the display. Ted leaned in, expression sharpening. "This isn't venting," he said. "This is organized scheming." I stepped closer, breath caught in my throat. The air shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough that instinct whispered, "This is where the danger changes shape." The next message appeared, and the second text session began. The monitor pinged again, sharp and hollow in the quiet house. Karen. Still watching her. She was out by the paddocks alone 20 minutes ago. Frank's jaw tightened. "She's been stalking your movements," he said. "Pattern mapping." Ted leaned forward. "Keep reading. Margaret will steer." Another message followed instantly. "Margaret. Has her routine changed?" I felt my skin crawl. Routine? They were studying me, tracking me. Frank muttered, "She's been casing you like a target." Another ping. "Karen. No. Same every night. Checks gates, walks fence, stalls, lights. Predictable." Ted shot me a look over his shoulder. "Predictable is a vulnerability." My stomach twisted. Margaret answered like she was marking steps on a blueprint. "Margaret. Predictability allows control. Control creates opportunity." Ted's fist curled once against the table. "Here we go," he whispered. "This is the part where they move from criminal harassment to action." The screen lit up again. "Karen. What kind of opportunity?" A long pause, the longest one so far. "Margaret. The kind that leaves her tractable." I didn't know the word tractable could feel like a threat, but coming from Margaret, it landed like a blunt object. Frank exhaled sharply. "She's talking about force." Another ping. "Karen, you want her scared?" Margaret responded instantly. "Fear is leverage." Another message. "Margaret, leverage moves obstacles." Ted lifted his head. "She's deciding how to escalate." Karen typed again. "Her animals didn't break her. The pond didn't break her. The trailer didn't break her. What will?" The room felt colder. My hands felt colder. Margaret's reply hit like a razor. "Take away her safety. Remove her autonomy. Remove her from the property by force." Frank froze. "There it is," he whispered. Ted nodded, voice low. "They're planning a forced removal." Karen answered fast, almost eager. "You mean grab her?" Margaret didn't hesitate. Pressure applied at the right angle. "Karen, when?" Margaret. "When she's isolated. When she's away from the house. When those dogs aren't watching." Frank shook his head slowly. "They've been waiting for you to be alone. That's why she watches you at night." Ted looked at me. "Charlie, this is targeted kidnapping." A new message appeared. "Karen, tonight?" A long pause. Ted and Frank leaned in at the same time. Then, "Margaret, if the window opens, take it." Ted swore under his breath. "She's giving authorization." Another message hit instantly. "Karen, I saw her, alone by the paddocks, but only for a minute. The breath drained from my lungs." Frank was already moving toward the door. Ted grabbed his arm. "Hold up. She's not done yet." And then it came. The line neither of them wanted to read. "Margaret, proceed." The room felt like it tilted. Outside, far off in the dark, somewhere beyond the tree line, an engine whispered awake. Ted's voice dropped to steel. "Frank, go! Now!" But it took off before Frank could get to the car's position. 3 quiet days passed. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe you. It just tricks you into believing the world has finally exhaled. Sabotage had stopped. No trucks lingering at the gate. No strange lights in the tree line. No footsteps where footsteps shouldn't be. Ted and Frank stayed vigilant, but even they relaxed half a notch. Not from comfort, from exhaustion. You can only run at a dead sprint for so long before your body insists on walking. By the fourth night, routine returned in small ways. Lights off at the usual time. Dogs settled. Staff asleep. I stepped outside to do my last check before heading to bed. A simple walk to the guest house to peek in on Rhonda, Brooke, and Guardian. 40 seconds. Maybe less. I'd done it 1,000 times. Tonight it felt too easy. The air had a strange stillness to it. The kind that makes you glance over your shoulder without knowing why. The gravel under my boots sounded louder than it should have. Even the horses in their stalls were quiet. Not sleeping, not restless, just listening. Halfway down the path, I noticed it. A shape behind the cottonwoods at the split in the driveway. Dark. Still. Wrong. Before I could take another step, the world snapped. A hand clamped over my mouth from behind, yanking me off my feet so violently the breath punched out of me. My boots scraped against gravel, kicking up sparks. Another arm locked around my ribs, pinning my arms so tight I couldn't move more than an inch. A second figure rushed from the shadows. Tall, wide-set shoulders, masked face. He grabbed my legs with practiced efficiency. A third slid open a van door, silent, smooth, waiting for me like a coffin. No time to scream. No chance to brace. No warning. I drove my heel backward, aiming for the kneecap of the man holding me. But he adjusted, shifting his weight like someone who'd hauled bodies before. "Don't make this harder for yourself," one of them growled. I bit the hand over my mouth, hard enough to taste copper. He didn't even flinch. I twisted, kicked, slammed my shoulder into the second man. Nothing. They were coordinated. Professional. Margaret's kind of professional. They dragged me into the van. Cold metal. Smell of sweat and gun oil. A tarp crinkled under my back as they forced me down. Zip ties cinched tight around my wrists. Another locked around my ankles. A third man sat beside me, gun resting casual against his thigh. The door slammed shut, dark. The engine rumbled. The van lurched forward. And then, deep against my hip, the tracker vibrated. Ted's tracker. The one he made me swear to wear, just until things settle. It activated the second my body left the property. They didn't know. They didn't pat me down. They didn't check for anything. Because Margaret's arrogance ran just as deep as her cruelty. The man beside me breathed heavy, bored, like this was just another job, another paycheck. Nothing more. I felt my pulse slam. Fear crawled high in my throat, but underneath it, something burned hotter. Rage. Karen wanted me terrified. Margaret wanted me broken. They were going to get neither. The van sped into the dark. And somewhere miles behind us, Ted Redding's phone vibrated. A sharp, urgent ping. A signal he prayed he would never hear. The tracker had gone live. The van didn't slow for anything. Not potholes, not curves, not the narrow back road that wound like a spine through the trees. Every turn slammed my shoulder into cold metal. Every bump sent a jolt up my spine. The men didn't look at me, didn't speak, didn't hesitate. This wasn't some stupid scare tactic. This was a pickup, a delivery, a transaction. The one in the passenger seat finally spoke. "Boss says no bruises on the face. Everything else doesn't matter." A humorless chuckle came from the one watching me. "No problem." I lifted my chin, glare sharp enough to cut steel. "You lay one hand on me." He leaned close, breath sour. "What? Your daddy Teddy gonna come save you?" He scoffed and flicked my cheek with 2 fingers. "He'll never find your body if she decides she's done playing." My stomach turned, half from nerves and half from the odor of someone foreign to the concept of water and soap, and I sure as hell wasn't giving him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I breathed. Slow, controlled. Because every second they thought I was helpless was a second Ted and Frank were closing the gap. The van hit gravel. Long gravel. Loose, crunching, echoing under the tires. I knew exactly where we were going. Margaret Livingston's property sat back on 20 acres. No neighbors. No lights. One long drive that dipped before it rose toward the house. The van climbed that rise now. The headlights washed over peeling siding, a sagging porch, a motion light that flickered 3 times before dying entirely. The house looked rotted from the bones outward. Of course she lived here. Move it! Rough hands grabbed my arms, hauling me upright. My boots scraped dirt as they dragged me through the side entrance. Past rusted tools, broken crates, a stack of hay bales molding in the corner. A basement door waited. Open. A stairwell yawning dark and narrow. They shoved me down the first few steps. My shoulder hit cement. Zip-tied hands couldn't catch me. The basement smelled like bleach and damp earth. A single bulb swung overhead, flickering. The concrete floor sloped toward a drain. And then footsteps. Slow, measured, confident. Margaret Livingston emerged from the shadows like she'd been carved out of the dark. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hair pinned neat. Her smile razor-thin. "Well, well, well," she said lightly. "You've given us all quite a headache, my dear." I pushed myself upright, back straight despite the pain. Just so you know, you're never getting my land. Just FYI." Her smile only widened. "Oh, sweetie, you will sign. If not now, then after a little. Persuasion." She lifted the manila envelope in her hand. The HOA forms. Then she pulled a pistol from behind her back. "Okay then, so let's begin." The gun leveled at my forehead like it had every right to be there. Margaret didn't posture. Didn't shake. Didn't bluff. She meant every word. Cold concrete pressed into my knees as I forced myself taller, refusing to shrink for her. "You won't shoot me," I said quietly. Her smile turned predatory. "Oh, and why not, dear?" "Because you're a coward." The smile evaporated. A muscle ticked in her jaw. "You think I won't kill for what's mine? See? That's the thing," I hissed. "None of this is yours. Not the land, not the HOA, not the people you terrorized. You've only ever stolen. Comes from being too self-entitled. Thinking you're too good to do what the rest of the world does. You know, work, pay taxes, that kind of thing." Her lips curled. "And I can steal the breath out of your lungs just as easily." She stepped closer. The gun touched my skin. Cold metal certainty. I didn't flinch. "You will sign," she ordered, "or you will die in this room. And your precious ranch will go to me anyway." My heart didn't race. It was steady, because over her shoulder, echoing faint but unmistakable, came the softest murmur of something she didn't hear. I gave her a long, exasperated sigh, shook my head in disapproval. Yeah? About that? 1? Never was yours. 2? Even if you did grow a pair. I kinda thought to myself one day, what if some delusional bitch thought she was the center of the universe and entitled to everything she laid her eyes on? Well, I couldn't allow that. So, in my infamous wisdom, I decided to sign my property, my business, and everything else I owned over to my godfather. Even had it notarized by a real lawyer and everything. I looked her square in the eyes and chuckled. "So yeah, good luck with you and your kennel bitch pup getting any part of my property." Then I heard them a bit louder, but not enough for her to hear. Boots on gravel. Quiet. Controlled. Closing in. Ted wasn't banging down doors. He was stalking. Margaret continued, oblivious. "You should have given up months ago. You had every warning. You lost a dog, a horse, your trailer, your pond." Her voice smoothed into venom. "And still you stand." She pressed the barrel harder, but not for much longer. A tense silence stretched. Then, a faint metallic click vibrated through the floorboards. A breach signal. I didn't let my eyes move. Didn't look toward the stairs. Didn't give away the rescue already forming overhead. But Margaret heard something. Her brow furrowed. What was that? The lights flickered. Dust drifted. A pipe rattled above us. What? She began. Boom! The entire house jolted as the SWAT team blew the rear entry open. Margaret jumped, whipping the gun toward the sound. Concrete dust rained from the rafters. What the hell did you do? She screamed. I exhaled through my nose. Oh, nothing much. I simply just wore my jacket. Her eyes widened. You! The basement door exploded inward, ripped off its hinges by a shield bearer. Flashlights sliced through the darkness. Voices thundered. Sheriff's office, nobody move! Margaret spun toward me. You little bitch! She didn't finish the sentence. Frank launched down the stairs like a bullet, slamming into her with the full force of someone who had been waiting to do this for a very, very long time. The gun skidded across the floor. Ted was behind him, covering her with his service weapon. Hands where I can see them, now! Margaret fought, kicking, growling, spitting, but Frank pinned her easily, twisting her wrists into the cuffs. This isn't over, she shrieked. You think this stops anything? You think you can take what's always been mine? Ted's voice dropped to a tone I had only heard once before. The night guardian was shot. You're done. She froze. Something in his voice finally got through. Maybe for the first time in her life, Margaret understood she had lost. Yet again. SWAT escorted her up the stairs, screaming hysterically, her voice breaking as she realized the walls she built were collapsing. Ted holstered his weapon and crossed the basement fast. He knelt in front of me, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. Charlie, he whispered. You're okay. You're safe now. I swallowed hard, throat aching. You found me. Tracker hit the moment they grabbed you, Frank said, voice shaking with adrenaline. You saved your own damn life by wearing that stupid, ugly jacket, kiddo. Ted cut the zip ties off my wrists with a steady hand, even though I could feel the anger vibrating off him. Not at me, but at what was done to me. When my wrists came free, the blood returning felt like needles. Ted pulled me into an embrace, brief, fierce, grounding. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. I didn't collapse, but I leaned, just for a heartbeat. Frank's voice cleared from the stairs. Let's get her home. Home. For the first time since they dragged me into that van, the word felt possible. The ride back felt longer than the trip out, even though nobody spoke. Shock has a way of stretching minutes into something heavier. When Frank pulled up beside the house, Ted helped me out of the truck like I was made of glass, even though we both knew I wasn't. Brooke and Rhonda rushed onto the porch, relief all over their faces. No questions, no panic, just quiet hands guiding me inside, the warmth of home swallowing me whole. Ted's voice softened as he closed the door behind us. Go shower, kiddo, warm clothes, we're here all night. I nodded, too drained to argue. The hot water stung at first, then numbed everything. By the time I stepped into my flannel pajamas and wrapped my white robe around me, the adrenaline was gone. And what replaced it was something hollow and trembling. Guardian wouldn't leave my side. Valor laid in front of the front door. Every time I sat, he paced. Every time I stood, Guardian pressed against my leg like he was trying to hold me up. Sleep wasn't happening. Not tonight. The house felt too small, too quiet, too filled with the echo of everything that could have gone differently. I tugged my robe tighter and slipped my feet into my slippers. I just need a breath, I whispered to Guardian. He padded beside me alongside Valor as I stepped toward the porch door. The night air met me first. Cold, still, almost unnaturally calm. I took one step outside. One breath. 1 second of pretending the world had finally stopped spinning. Then Guardian growled and took off toward the barn. I called after him, but the look of it, the barn. Ted! Barn fire! It hit just before 1:30 a.m. Not a flicker. Not a glow. A flash jump. The kind of ignition you only get when accelerant is used in volume, not in lines. The south end of the main barn lit like someone had opened a furnace door from the inside. Horses screamed, a sound you never forget once you've heard it. Not fear, not panic, agony. Ted was already running before I could form language. The heat met us before the flames did, rolling out in waves so intense it felt alive. He didn't hesitate. He went for the animals first. He threw open stall doors and drove horses out into the arena with the force of someone saving lives, not property. I followed him, grabbing halters blindly, shoving animals toward open air while embers fell like burning hail. Some stalls wouldn't open, hinges warped from heat or jammed by debris. The smoke dropped low fast, choking visibility. You don't think about danger in moments like that. You think about names. You think, not this one. Not again. Not another Sophie. Sirens finally cut through the roar, distant at first, then closer. But fire always outruns help. By the time the fire crews reached the gate, the roof at the south end had already begun to sag. A death sentence for anything still inside. And that was the moment I understood the truth. Karen hadn't tried to destroy my reputation, or my business, or my finances. She had tried to destroy my world, and she had come close. When the flames were finally beaten back enough to enter the barn, it was unrecognizable. Most of it was now gone, a blackened cavity of twisted metal and collapsed timber. The air tasted like burnt hair and wet ash. We moved through the wreckage in silence, counting survivors by elimination. Most of the horses Ted had driven out made it, scattered, trembling, singed but alive. A few stood bleeding from panic injuries, having thrown themselves against doors in terror, trying to escape. But 3 stalls, 3 lives never made it out in time. One gelding was found collapsed against the door, teeth buried into the wood where he tried to bite his way out. Another lay on his side, airway scorched, legs rigid in the final posture of fighting for oxygen. The third lay underneath a fallen beam. Rhonda came out from the side of the barn coughing. The coop is also gone. All 10 hens and 1 rooster. Their names were added to the record, not just as losses, but as victims of felony arson. The fire captain didn't need hours to determine cause. He pointed to the burn patterns, upward, fast, isolated to ignition points, and to the accelerant residue still seeping under the debris. This wasn't accidental, he told the detectives. This was placed and lit. No one argued. Marla arrived with the injunction order still warm from the printer. This goes to the DA today, she said. We're no longer filing complaints. We are filing charges. The detective closed his notebook with the finality of a gavel. We're escalating this to arson with intent to kill livestock. And that was the line. Not harassment. Not neighbor dispute. Not vandalism. Attempted mass destruction. The fire didn't just change the case. It changed what the state was willing to do about it. By noon, the case had left the sheriff's hands and landed on the desk of the district attorney. Not because of outrage, because of scale. Property crime is local. Poisoning and arson with animals trapped inside is felony jurisdiction. The DA didn't ask for more information. He requested warrants, financial records, phone records, access logs, surveillance footage from Vista Hills itself, any communication tied to Karen or the board during the escalation window. This was no longer about who did it. The state was now building the argument of why. Motive, planning, conspiracy. The HOA imploded under the weight of subpoenas. 2 board members lawyered up immediately. One issued a public resignation statement trying to distance himself. I condemn any and all acts of violence and was unaware of any wrongdoing. The problem with that sentence was simple. No one asked him if he condemned anything. He answered a question no one asked. Guilty people nervously tell on themselves when they're scared. Karen, however, didn't hide. She doubled down, posting under yet another alias claiming the fire was insurance fraud, self-inflicted sabotage. Marla read it with a calm that terrified me more than Karen's rage. She just accused a felony victim during an open criminal case, she said. That's civil defamation on top of criminal liability. She is burying herself. The DA's office requested an emergency hearing date and got one. A judge agreed the situation qualified as a public safety emergency, meaning the case would be heard immediately instead of waiting months. That hearing would be the first time Karen would be forced to face consequences in a courtroom instead of from behind a screen or a steering wheel. The fire had changed the case. Now the fight was moving into the courts. The fire ended the guessing. She had taken lives to win a war, and now the rest of it would be taken from her in a courtroom. The ranch didn't sleep after the fire. None of us did. The fire crews stayed until sunrise, combing through the wreckage piece by piece. Floodlights cast long shadows over the twisted beams, the collapsed loft, the curled metal roofing. Smoke drifted low across the property, clinging to the air like grief. Ted worked shoulder to shoulder with the fire chief, their voices low, tense, clipped. I watched them from the porch, Guardian leaning against my leg, while the paramedic finished wrapping the burn on Ted's forearm. The fire chief finally straightened, helmet tucked under one arm. "Redding," Danvers said, voice grim. "This wasn't electrical, wasn't spontaneous, it was set. Multiple points of ignition, accelerant was used." Ted didn't react, not outwardly, but the muscle in his jaw ticked once, hard. Frank came jogging up from the back tree line, breathing heavy, holding something in a gloved hand. "Found this," he called out. He lifted the metal canister into the light, a commercial-grade gasoline can, still warm, still reeking. The fire chief swore under his breath. "That," he said, "didn't get here by accident." Everything went quiet. Not the quiet of shock, the quiet of confirmation. Karen hadn't just terrorized us. She had escalated to felony arson, with intent to destroy livestock, property, and lives. Detectives finished their statements. Crime scene tape went up. The DA's emergency hearing was scheduled, and the tide finally shifted. When the last engine rolled off the property, Ted turned to us, smoke-streaked, exhausted, voice worn to the bone. "Get what rest you can," he said quietly. "Next week. This moves to the civil courtroom and then to criminal court. She's not walking away from this. And neither is Mommy Dearest or even the rest of her goon gang." I wasn't sure rest was possible, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The fire hadn't ended the fight. It had only ended the pretending. By dawn, as the first light caught the smoke drifting off the ruins, the truth settled into place.